Let's do one more functional question, and then I want to talk about artists. You mentioned a theater. There's a history of theaters coming to grief when the general manager and the artistic director are at loggerheads. Can you give me I mean, I can think of, well, you watch them as an actor, right? You sit back as an actor and you watch the war going on and go, oh my God, this is not good for the theater. Can you pick me up some examples where that happened between a board and an artistic director? I only think because it's a useful exercise for new artistic directors and new general managers to understand that relationship has to work and who has to give to have a common vision. Otherwise, you're really crippling the theater.
Well, the only one I really can reference is the one I mentioned when I was working at the Playhouse as a stage manager, and the artistic director and the general manager at the time did not get along. So the artistic director stepped down, was replaced by somebody else, and then the incoming artistic director...
Was that Joy Coghill?
Joy hired me originally, but it was after Joy. It was the David Gardner and whoever was, I can't remember who was the executive director at the time. And then when David Gardner came, Paxton Whitehead was hired as artistic director, and he made it very clear that the current executive director had to go if he was going to be hired. So if I'm not getting it all mixed up, that's my recollection, and so that general manager, executive director left. So Paxton got who he wanted, and that made that combination work. So it's...
So you think that's part of the will of the new artistic director to say, look, here's the conditions I will be artistic director. I have to have a GM with which I can work, and if this person doesn't, I have to have the right to say I walk or he goes.
Yeah,
he or she
yeah.
goes.
And there's other examples of that. I mean, I've read about...
Because I watched it at Buddies in Bad Time. I watched it was Toronto Workshop Productions then. I watched that rip itself apart. I watched it at Great Canadian Theatre Company in Ottawa. You know, and you think, and I didn't know whether it's career jealousy or territorial or what wasn't that was making that toxic thing inside a fragile arts organization as it is. Or is it just personality?
Well, it is definitely personality, and territorial is another good way to describe it. It seems to me that the artistic director and the general manager or executive director, if they both report to the board. Now, you see, for most of a large part of my career, I was both, so it was only me talking to myself. So I could have my own arguments. But once I got a general manager, now I can give an example just in my own career. So when we were about to open the Stanley Theatre. This is a 650-seat theatre that we're taking on. This organization, at that point, we were running this theatre, 450 seats, and we were running the review stage, 200 seats. So now we're adding a 650-seat theatre. And the board, rightly, decided that it probably was time to have a general manager that reported to them, as opposed to reporting to me. They could have decided the general manager would report to me, which probably is what I would have preferred. But the board at the time, and I was having certain issues with dealing with the board. I was probably so distracted by we never set out to have the Stanley Theatre. That was never a plan. That was something that happened because the Stanley Theatre is an old movie house, right? That closed in 1991, and as a movie house, and then the city at the time decided that it could not be turned into like a Gap clothing store. It had to be retained because it was it was a heritage, partly a heritage building, that it had to be retained for a cultural use. So it kind of was in limbo, and then we got involved with Vancouver Theatre Sports League, an improv group, to see if we could twin it, divide the theater in two, and they would have like basically the upstairs, and we'd have the downstairs, and we would move the review stage, the cabaret, there. Anyways, all it was all sort of inspired by the fact that when I lost Seymour Street, the 200-seat intimate theater, which is where 7 Stories premiered and a whole bunch of new plays, Talking Dirty, like it was a very special place. So when we lost that, I set upon a journey to find another space like it. And that was how it led to, in a very odd way, to the Stanley. Well, then in the mid-90s, it became very clear that to convert the Stanley Theatre into 2 theater space was going to cost way more than the budget that we had. So it was decided to keep it as one, as a standalone venue with 650 seats, which is what it is today. So the board, and so I'm very distracted by suddenly having to get involved in figure out, what am I going to program in this big space? I mean, suddenly when you talk about on the level with the Playhouse, which is also close to 700 seats, am I going to be doing Shakespeare? What am I going to program? I mean, I was very comfortable programming this space and programming the review stage, and if I had another small intimate theater for new work or experimental work, I'd be happy with that. So the board then decided that we should have a general manager to look after the financial side, because I could see they thought disaster was right over the horizon. And so they allowed me to hire the general manager, even though that person would report to the board. And so I hired somebody that I thought, this is in the late 90s, that I thought, we're going to get along, this is fine. He had a good resume, and I felt this would be a good working relationship. Well, it turned out not to be. And it went sour.
And you had the right to let them go?
No, because he reported to the board. And he decided, and I'm not speaking for him, but it was my impression that he had decided that he should be the sole person, that I should be let go, that I was old school, you know, we were now going to run this big theater, it needed to have a new vision, and he was the right person for it. And so when it became clear to me that he was not supporting me as artistic director, so that's a classic not getting along, I started campaigning with the board members who I felt were supportive of my position that this was not tenable, that we had to find a way through this, and either I would go or he had to go. And fortunately they decided that he should go, or they convinced him to resign. They didn't fire him or anything, but they sort of convinced him that, you know, your idea is not going to work. We're in support of Bill, and we've gotten this far, and we're going to continue. So then,
was it like, oh, this is a board decision, or this is a competition? I mean, where is Bill in this going, wait a minute, I just spent 20 years building this thing up, and they're going to take it over because they walked in and decide they're going to turn it into their, I mean, where is
it
emotional
is sort of
bond
like
here?
that, yeah. And
pissed
because
off?
I'd had time to, know the board members really well, I felt I had, a handful that were supportive of my position.
Right.
And yeah, they could make the decision either way. They
What
could
would you have
punted
done
me,
if they said, sorry, we're going to let you go?
find another job, go somewhere else. I don't know.
Political science?
Make movies. Initially, I thought I would become a film director before we got the Gravel Odd stage, and I thought, oh, I see, I'm going to be running a couple of theaters.